Hello everyone, Canon Loa here, this time with Path of Exile. Now, in Path of Exile, this recent league, the Delirium League, added, as most of you probably know, plenty of cluster jewels that can really spice up your passive tree. And I have been trying out the hollow palm technique, which is from the one with nothing unique cluster jewel. I bought a corrupted one with a you cannot be hindered, which doesn't really do much for me. But I was looking at the hollow palm technique, and honestly, it is a very interesting keystone to have. And I was experimenting with using a raider with frenzy, and this kind of with the same idea that Mathil had, if any of you know him. He's quite a big Path of Exile streamer. He was using hollow palm technique with frenzy with a raider, and I thought that maybe I could make one with my own spice to it, in a sense. And the hollow palm technique is much more powerful than I would have imagined, in all honesty. You can get insane damage numbers in the leveling process that I have never even seen before, I don't think, from my personal experience. Now, obviously, I am not a super... I am not a Path of Exile player that can make the best of the best builds. But at the same point, I'm not really doing anything super outstanding with this character, and I can get incredible damage numbers. And right now I am playing with a level 53 character with 400 dexterity. So how hollow palm technique works, as it says, you gain base attack physical damage per 10 dexterity that you have. So basically it's get as much dexterity as you can to get the most damage out of it, and then you get a 60% more attack speed multiplier while you're unencumbered, which is kind of insane to think about. Just a flat out 60% more attack speed. But it does have massive drawbacks. You cannot wear gloves or weapons, which you're using your hands as your weapon, so that isn't really much of a downside, but not being able to wear gloves can be a definite downside. So, with a level 53 character with 400 dexterity using frenzy, I get a tooltip DPS of 13,000, and that is without frenzy charges. If you've never used frenzy really at all, this thing gains more attack speed and more attack damage the more frenzy charges you have. So right now I have 5 frenzy charges, so then I get much more damage out of this than that. With all of my boosts, like my flasks and stuff active, I can get up to like 30,000 DPS at level 53. And that is insane. And I'm only using a 4 link, so I'm not using like a tabula to gain a 6 link early or anything. So I have Frenzy, Multi-Strike, Frenzy, Melee Splash, Multi-Strike support, and Impale. So Impale doesn't even show up on your tooltip DPS for how much Impale gives you. So I'm theoretically doing much more than that. So that is insane. I think the most, well, I shouldn't say most damage, but typically the damage that I am able to dish out by the time I finish, while I'm in like Act 9 or Act 10, is roughly 10,000 to 15,000 DPS. And the fact that I'm getting this like 3 times that amount at Act 7 is incredible. And I'm glad that I am trying this out now, because I'm pretty sure this is inevitably going to be nerfed. But at the same point, I wanted to make this video not just to showcase how powerful it is, But being unencumbered and using your fists as weapons instead of actual held weapons has some major drawbacks to it. The first major drawback is that since you cannot wear gloves, especially at my point in the campaign, I have very poor resists on everything except for cold, and even cold isn't maxed out. I find that it is pretty hard to find triple resist items pretty much until the end game stuff. So not being able to wear gloves is a massive drawback. So you are very reliant on the less item slots you have to fill out your resists, and it is incredibly hard to fill out chaos resistance, especially on top of that. So the other thing is that since you aren't wearing weapons or gloves, you have very few gem sockets to work with. Since you're probably going to use your body armor as your 6th link in the end game, that leaves you with 2 items worth of damage and aura potentials. And in my planned build for this character, one of them was going to have the 2 melee totems, multi-totem support, and maim to it. Well, that's one whole item already used up, and then my helmet was going to use utility stuff like Blood Rage, Berserk, and whatnot. And so I have to actually rely on unset rings in my planned build to get auras. And that is just really kind of strange to me, not doing anything like this, because you're missing out on 6 gem sockets from your weapons, which is typically where I would put Berserk, Blood Rage, and whatnot, and then on the gloves, that's another 4 link that you don't have access to. So without further ado with the analysis and everything, let's go to actual combat, see how it actually plays. So with Frenzy, and using a 4 link, I have 29 mana cost per use, and that's mostly from the super high mana multiplier multi-strike as a whole. So I think I'm gonna go, yeah, that way. So mana can be a definite issue with this character, probably, well, pretty much just like any melee build in general, to be honest. Having mana usages is definitely something melee has to deal with more than casters, in my opinion. And I have Revelry, the Revelry node, so I actually gain a tiny bit of mana back per time that I hit enemies. That's why I'm not super being drained instantly. But I am using a mana flask, especially with the idea that Frenzy gains super high attack speed with all the Frenzy charge stacking. So with dealing with packs, it's not too bad. But another thing I wanted to point out is, as you can see here with unencumberment, you pretty much have next to no area of effect or melee range, more importantly. Like, it's really easy to whiff attacks, and it's a little bit more comfortable now than when I was first able to equip Hollow Palm. When I first equipped it, it was even worse than this. So you have to be like pretty much in the face of your enemy in order to hit them. And that is really problematic because it feels really awkward when clearing sometimes. So even though that I have this super amazing damage output, it didn't really feel good to clear with it, if that makes sense. And also, doesn't really, oh, come on. Yeah, just like that. It's really hard to get it just right. Anything? No. So I'd definitely say that, while it is incredibly powerful, it is also incredibly awkward to use at the same time. As well as having very few gem sockets to work with. And I'm guessing once Path of Exile 2 comes out and you can use essentially a 6-link for every single slot for yourself, that will definitely make this a lot easier to play with. But of course we have no idea at this point in time when that is going to be available. So depending on how this goes in the endgame, I might make a build guide, so... And yeah, I would definitely say Revelry is pretty much saving me from constantly using the Mana Flask. And eventually I'm gonna get Mana Leech. But the thing is that once I get my Ascendancy with Frenzy and get like all of these super high attack speed modifiers from Onslaught Effect, increased attack speed and Frenzy Charge and all that, my mana is pretty much going to evaporate whenever I want to attack. And according to my Path of Building, I get over 20 attacks per second. So pretty much with any skill, unless you somehow get a lot of area of effect from the few items that you do have, or you can get a lot of it from the tree, like near the duelist and stuff, you're gonna have very small area of effect, most likely. So yeah, that's pretty much whole palm technique in a nutshell there. So I kind of wanted to emphasize here that the people, well, judging on Mathel's video on trying out whole palm technique, he pretty much made it sound like it was pretty much one of the, I wouldn't say the most broken thing, but pretty much like one of, definitely something that was so high up there in power that it at least was close to the aura stacking that this league has had. And while I do agree that the amount of damage you can get from this, especially early on in leveling, it just doesn't really feel super amazing to clear with because of that really short melee range. You're pretty much required to get Master of the Arena for the 2 melee strike range, and if you're doing any sort of area of effect melee skill, you pretty much need these 3 nodes as well as possibly some sort of area of effect on your armor, or from anointing like Amplify or something, because I'm not sure how well melee splash support is going to work in the endgame, but definitely it is one of those things where it's shocking in 2 different ways. Especially when I first tried equipping it at level 32, I had, I think, 300 dexterity, and that was before I'd gotten these dexterity nodes or the dual wielding nodes. And I had gotten 5,000 tooltip DPS before having frenzy charges at level 32. Like, that was just unheard of for me. And it's really, was really quite a shock. So, But at the same time, though, I was using Cobra Lash for the beginning of the leveling process, and I have to say that the early game bosses, before you get any decent weapons, Merveil, like pretty much any boss in general, was just unbelievably tanky, and it took probably, I don't know, I want to say like 5 to 10 minutes per boss to kill, and not necessarily because it was difficult, but because of how much health and resist they had to chaos with using Cobra Lash, and going from that to a build that can quite easily kill bosses within less than a minute, that was definitely a shock. So I think yeah, this is definitely going to be nerfed. I don't know how necessarily. I would think that they're probably going to nerf the more attack speed to probably 30 or 40%, and then the flat damage from maybe 12 to 16, maybe. Like that's just my guess. Like something along those lines. I really don't want it to get nerfed into the ground, because it's a really interesting concept that you're giving up both weapon slots and your gloves, and you're really starved for gem sockets to gain this ability. And I don't really want them to just go, oh, we're gonna half it, and so that it's no longer super viable anymore. Especially since that short melee range really just felt super awkward for me to deal with. So that was my first try of whole palm technique. So, and hopefully if you can get the chance before the league ends, there's about a month, like 3 weeks to a month left of the league, so if you can quickly get a hollow palm technique character out there, it is definitely going to, getting that super high early damage as soon as you get the dexterity cluster is kind of satisfying to have, especially with, like I said, how hard the earlier bosses are now after they were buffed through the roof, and in my opinion unnecessarily. So with that, thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.